In ancient times, it was difficult to meet a small family. All had many children. The wife gave birth almost every year and became something of a factory for the production of her offspring. But not everyone today knows the ancient ways of giving birth to children, their conception, as well as rituals and other features. Who came up with the idea of giving birth lying on their back? Give birth alone? Why did women in labor build a stone pyramid in a field, and how did they use it? Banana painkiller? Who came up with this? Why was bird droppings used during childbirth and forced to sneeze? Let's figure out why women were forced to drink the milk of another woman in labor and why barley sprouted in the urine of girls. How did Ottoman women actually give birth to children, and what did Roksolana cut off and bury from her descendants? Does a woman look like a baby factory? Was it really impossible to invent a cure and not get pregnant? About this and not only today in our history. The greatest female strength and power. That's what we saw in the story of Hurrem, the legal wife of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. She gave birth to the Sultan of 6 children, and this, for a moment, in the 16th century. Then the quality of medicine could only be dreamed of, and most women and children died either in childbirth or within the next month. So how did Hurrem manage to give birth to so many children, and how did she even survive? In the harem, women were literally forced to give birth, figuratively speaking. Due to the high infant mortality in that era, the dynasties were repeatedly threatened that there would be no one to take the throne. Therefore, it was desirable that the concubine give birth to a son. Potential mothers, i.e. concubines, were not allowed to eat sour or salty, as it was believed that this prevents a possible pregnancy. The Ottomans were quite a superstitious people, and unlike the fact that Hurrem in the TV series The Magnificent Age screamed at every corner that she was pregnant, pregnancy as such until the very end, until it became noticeable, was hidden from strangers. Only the closest relatives knew about the imminent birth of a child. Remember how Hurrem demanded quail and ate all the goodies? It's right. There were such speculations that if a pregnant woman does not receive and does not eat what she urgently and really wanted, then the child will be born without limbs at all. That is why, probably, Roksolana ate all the quails along with the eggs. You will not be surprised by the fact that the sex of a child in the Ottoman Empire was determined in the same way as it is now. But I am not talking, of course, about ultrasound. If a sharp belly is a boy, a round belly is a girl. If the pregnant woman is beautiful, a boy; if ugly, a girl. And of course, what kind of childbirth can take place without a midwife? Only if you accidentally give birth in the field. In the Ottoman palace there was a midwife who delivered the baby. She was easy to recognize. She walked with 2 sticks. In general, it was certainly a very prestigious profession. The midwife made huge financial gains from the first day the pregnancy was announced. And when the child is born, she could even become a very rich woman. How did Hurrem and other concubines give birth in the palace? Not like we were shown in the show. For this process, this funny awkward chair stood in the palace, but quite pretty, I think. He still stands in the Topkapi Museum as a silent reminder that he had at least 500 children in his history. I think that at different times these devices changed, but this particular chair is in the museum. In fact, many Ottoman miniatures depicting the process of childbirth have survived to this day. Here we see that at this moment a woman is surrounded by quite a lot of people, and there is the same chair. My God! When a child was born, he was dipped in salt water or simply rubbed with salt to remove a possible evil eye, cleanse the body and make it strong, able to withstand various types of evil spirits. By the way, some Turkish families still use this custom with salt for newborn children. It is believed that this custom is more preserved in remote corners of Turkey. A very interesting ritual, from my point of view, the Ottomans did with the baby's umbilical cord. But first I will say that casting lead from damage from the evil eye is a traditional ritual for a mother and her newborn. This was shown in the TV series Magnificent, and it's true. The umbilical cord was immediately cut and, attention, buried. A whole ritual was carried out with the burial of the umbilical cord, But just do not think that there was a separate cemetery for this. The place where he was buried was important. So, if she was buried in the mosque courtyard, then the child will be an imam, and if in the school courtyard, then a teacher or just a very good person, and so on. The first 40 days after giving birth were special. During this period, most debilitated children or women died as a result of complications. Therefore, during this period, mother and her child were taken care of in a special way. Starting from the first days after the birth, the newly made mother and her offspring were visited by many different guests who brought gifts, jewelry and gold. The whole room was hung with amulets, and guests were served sherbet. If a jar of sherbet is served with an open spout, then a boy was born, and if the jug is covered with a red cloth, then a girl. And one of the most important rituals was to give the child a name. It is an ancient Islamic tradition where the azan is recited in the child's ear and his name is pronounced. Children were usually named after some people, relatives, significant and respected, but within the family, each name was purely subjective. And, of course, the birth of a child in the Ottoman palace was celebrated with great folk and palace festivities, which sometimes reached several weeks. Starting from Suleiman the Magnificent, people learned about the birth of a child in the family of the Sultan by cannon shots. We have learned that in the Ottoman Empire, children were born sitting on a special chair, and who invented childbirth lying on their backs. And the world owes this posture to Louis the Great, the French king. Once Louis XIV wanted to see how babies are born. He hid behind a screen in one of the houses where the lady of the court lived, who was about to give birth. The woman in labor was laid on the bed, on her back, so that the king could see everything. She gave birth under the constant attention of the king, and everything ended well. Since then, the birthing chair, which has been used until now, has been gradually replaced by the recumbent position. Oh, if you look at this chair, you will see the resemblance to the birthing chair in an Ottoman palace, right? For safe and easy childbirth, a woman in labor always needed an assistant. Midwife is the best option, but they were not always around. Then whoever wanted to help women. For wealthier ladies, there were even separate houses for childbirth, and a person with an ancient medical education took delivery. Ordinary women were helped to give birth by different people from a close and not very close circle. Most often they were midwives and healers. But you will be surprised to know that there were times when a woman gave birth alone. In general, it should be noted that the ancient women in labor were distinguished by incredible endurance. At certain times it was believed that the child should be born in seclusion with the mother. The woman left the people in the place where she lived in order to give birth to a child alone. Where she was going to give birth, the woman first collected stones. She built a high mountain out of them, then knelt down, resting against the stones, pushed off and gave birth to her child. She herself cut off his umbilical cord, wrapped him in a blanket and returned home. It is not surprising that there was a huge mortality rate among women in labor. In ancient Greece and in ancient Rome, they used an amazing way to quickly give birth to a child. Women in labor were given various drugs that cause sneezing, and compresses from bird droppings were applied to the sides. Interesting, from my point of view, seems to be the process of childbirth in ancient Africa. But first I want to note that medicine in this country is still at a fairly low level. The people responsible for attending the birth put the woman on a board imitating a table. Banana peel wine was given as a pain reliever. In fact, the expectant mother gave birth while drunk. In the archives found in the same Africa, a document was found in which the author described the process of caesarean section. And to be honest, this is something from the realm of horror, it's hard to imagine. Judge for yourself, I quote. A 20-year-old woman giving birth for the first time, completely naked, lay on a somewhat inclined board, the head of which rested against the wall of the hut. Under the influence of banana wine, she is half asleep. She was tied to her bed with 3 bandages. The surgeon with a knife in his hands stood on the left side, one of his assistants held her legs, the other fixed her lower abdomen. After washing his hands and lower abdomen, first making the woman drunk with banana wine. Uttering a loud cry, which was picked up by the crowd gathered around the hut, he made an incision along the midline of the abdomen, from the pubic joint almost to the navel. With this incision, he cut both the abdominal wall and the uterus itself. One assistant with great skill cauterized the bleeding places with a red-hot iron. The other moved apart the edges of the wound to enable the surgeon to remove the child from the uterine cavity. Having removed the placenta separated during this time and the blood clots formed through the incision, the surgeon, with the help of his assistants, moved the patient to the edge of the operating table and turned her on her side so that all the fluid could flow out of the abdominal cavity. Only after all this, the edges of the wound are tied with strong threads. A paste was applied to the wound, which was prepared by carefully chewing some 2 roots and spitting the resulting slurry into a pot. A heated banana leaf was placed on the paste, and the whole thing was strengthened with something like a bandage. But how did the ancient people know about pregnancy, besides what I have already told in the context of the Ottoman Empire? If the family wanted to know who to expect, a boy or a girl, then they did a kind of ancient test. This was in ancient Egypt, but the result was always so close to the truth that the Greeks, Byzantines, and even Europeans began to use this method. A small piece of cloth was dipped in the urine of a pregnant woman and seeds of wheat and barley were placed in it. If the barley sprouted first, it was a boy; if wheat, then it was a girl. The knowledge of the ancient Jews in gynecology and obstetrics was not much different from the Egyptians or, for example, the Chinese. They, in order to determine the sex of the unborn child, sent the woman to walk on fairly soft soil or sand. A deep footprint meant a boy. They could not give birth? Have they come up with a cure for this? In general, of course, contraceptive drinks were used, and not only. So, if a woman from the modern Indian tribe of Brazil for some time wants not to give birth, then an infusion of grass was prepared for her, and she stopped getting pregnant. Then, even after a few years, if she wants to have children again, she drinks a tincture of another herb and pregnancy occurs. A kind of poison and antidote. What kind of herbs are kept in great secret? It is not even recorded anywhere, but is passed from mouth to mouth from generation to generation. You will be surprised by the fact that at the court of Kings Henry, Francis II, Charles IX, Henry III, the chief surgeon was a man who had never been trained in this anywhere. The Frenchman Ambroise Paré was originally an apprentice barber in a Parisian hospital and then served in the army as a barber surgeon. Thus, it was Paré who in 1549 published that guide to extracting babies, both living and dead, from the womb. My friends, thank you for watching. I make quality content for you. Do not miss new videos, subscribe to the channel and click on the bell to receive notifications. With you, Michael.